Let's start off by creating a directory called containerization. CD into that directory. We'll create two files, so a Dockerfile and an index.html file. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm creating an index.html file to serve up on a web server. So this isn't needed for a Dockerfile or a Docker image or anything like that. It's just for the purpose of this tutorial. A Dockerfile, on the other hand, is necessary if we're going to build a Docker image. A Docker image is something that you need to run a Docker container. So let's start off with the index.html file. I've just written some HTML previously, so we'll insert that here. It's just a simple hello world web page that we're going to serve up in our web server. So for our Dockerfile, so like I said, the Dockerfile is used to create Docker images. Generally in a Dockerfile, we want to pull from a base image, so you can use the word from. So let's come check out Docker Hub. So Docker Hub has great base images. So let's have a look at the Nginx web server. So this is a pre-populated Docker image that's running the Nginx web server. So Docker images have tags. So tags are for things like versioning the Docker image, for things like specific dependencies installed on those Docker images. So let's use the stable Alpine tag. You don't need to know what Alpine is. Basically, it's just a lightweight version of this image. Let's copy our index.html file into the location within the image that web server is serving up those static HTML files. So that location is share nginx.html/html. And then we want to expose the default port 80, which is HTTP. And save that. All right, so let's build that Docker image. So we're going to type in Docker build. We can tag that image. So let's call it nginx-example and use the tag 1. All right, so if we put a dot here, it'll look for the file called Dockerfile within the current location. But if it's called something else, say Dockerfile.example, you'll need to type that in here. Because ours is called Dockerfile, we'll just use the dot. Okay, so that's pulled from the base image, copied the index.html file into that location and exposed port 80. So that image should be built now. So let's have a look. There it is. Let's run a container from that image. So we'll run it in detach mode. So basically it'll run that, it'll build that container in the background in detach mode. Let's expose port 80 on the host and port forward that to 80 within the container. Let's name this container too. Actually, let's call it Nginx example 1. And then we want to build it from that base image. Sorry, that image we created. Example and then the tag 1. Okay, so we have that running now. Let's go over to our browser. Oh, I pressed X. Type in localhost 8080. That's being served up. Okay, let's create another Docker container just to show you exactly what it's doing. So let's go back into our index.html file. We'll add a 2 to the end. And we will build that as a separate image. So let's call it Nginx example tag 2. All right, so that's built. Let's run that as a separate container. So we'll call this Nginx example detach mode and ported on a different port, so 8081 to 80. Oh, Nginx tag 2. Okay, we'll name it something else. You can see it being run there. So example 3 and example 1. Right, let's look at localhost. Sticky keyboard. So this one says server 2, they're completely different containers. So they're serving up 2 separate files.